Welcome to the Bike Life podcast by Warmshowers Foundation, where we will be sharing knowledge, experience, tools, and stories of touring cyclists and hosts from around the world. I'm Tavra Lee, the woman behind the scenes at Warmshowers Foundation, the leading platform for cyclists looking for hosts and to connect with a passionate international community. Find out more by visiting us at Warmshowers.org. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Bike Life. This is Jerry Kopak, and if you still don't recognize my voice yet, give it time. We'll get there. I'm the new host of Bike Life, taking over the reins from Tavra. But don't worry, she's still here as our executive director, but she's focusing her time on making your experiences as hosts and travelers even better. A little bit about me. I've been the finance guy for Warm Showers for about 5 years now, and when I'm not building spreadsheets, you'll find me hosting bike travelers in my home in Breckenridge, Colorado, or on my own bike journey someplace else in the world. Today's show, I'm talking with Liz Pomeroy, a musician who took the expression taking her show on the road to an entirely new level by cycling more than 8,000 kilometers to play 60 shows throughout Canada. Hey, Liz, welcome to Bike Life.
Hey, Jerry, how are you?
Doing well. So you live in Canada, yeah?
I do. I live in Edmonton.
Ah, okay. So we were talking offline. That sounds like a very non-Canadian accent. Where is that accent originally from?
It's a very Irish accent, fresh out of Dublin. Out of Dublin 15 years ago. Yeah.
15 years ago. Been a good move?
Great move.
Yeah?
Yeah. The Canada and especially Alberta is fantastically supportive of the arts. So being a musician, couldn't be happier with my choices.
I love it. So I was looking through the archives of Bike Life, and I'm pretty sure you are the first bike traveling musician that we've interviewed here on Bike Life. So kudos to you. Now, at the risk of sounding horribly unoriginal, because I'm sure you've gotten this question way too many times, I'm still going to ask, why a bike for your trip?
The short answer is it was the only thing left. I grew up on bicycles. I think I was somewhere trapped between loving bicycles and wishing it was a horse. And it was the cheapest way to have a horse and or the closest thing. So I made a record in 2021, and I'm a huge fan of Glenn Hansard, who is a musician out of Dublin, right? Mm-hmm. So his band is The Frames. I grew up watching them, took huge inspiration from them.
What was the movie? Once, yes.
About the buskers, yeah, totally. Yeah. And so he had this band called The Frames, which had a fiddle in it, which hugely inspired my sound. And during lockdown, he was doing an Instagram live, and he's always, I didn't realize, but he's been very environmentally focused for a long time. And he just made this comment saying how nice and clean the skies were since no one was flying anywhere, and how it got him thinking that it had inspired him to maybe rework his world tour schedule when things opened back up again, so he would have fewer transatlantic flights. And I said, oh, that's an interesting concept. And in 2018, I had just rebranded myself. I'd been in lots and lots of different bands over the years as 0Stella, and I spelled 0Stella. I took the name from a PJ Harvey song. I'm a huge PJ Harvey fan. And changed the spelling into starting with a 0, because 2018 I had gotten really into like the low impact lifestyle kind of thing to try and, like it started out being named as a zero waste lifestyle in the community, but they kind of moved away from that after a number of years because they found it was a real turnoff to people trying to get into that kind of lifestyle, because it had a real all or nothing feel to it, which is not the goal at all. So, but for branding's sake and for starting a conversation's sake, I kept the 0. It's the easiest way to explain yourself. So 0Stella became my name, 0Stella to my face. And I figured, having heard Glenn Hansard say this, I was like, well, if anyone is going to do it, probably the girl with the 0 in her name should be the one to give it a hack. So through 21, after I'd made the record, I started exploring all these different ways to move across Canada. And I had just been accepted to France for an artist residency. And I was like, oh, well, this is a good opportunity. How do I get myself to France, being in Edmonton with the fewest amount of transatlantic miles in an airplane? And so I figured, well, I can get to the east coast of Canada and just fly into Ireland, where I have a family base, and then make my way to France that way. And another bunch of opportunities opened up and closed because of COVID. So I had a line on a band van that had been converted, like a Sprinter van, that had been converted by its previous owners, who were a band down in Nashville, I think, and they had built a stage on top of the roof, and they would just drive around the country performing on their roofs.
That's unique.
And then super cool. And then also Via Rail, who is the national tourist rail line in Canada. They have a very famous part of their rail line called the Rocky Mountain Rail, I guess. And it's a very beautiful tourist attraction where you can get the train and it'll take you through the Rocky Mountains, and it's beautiful scenery and things. But they used to have for a very long time a program called Artists on Board, where they would allow free passage for up to 3 musicians working as a trio unit or smaller, in exchange for 3 sets a day with Canadian content. So you could cover Canadian artists or do your own stuff, or a mix of both. And it was a really viable way for musicians to move across the country. As you know, it's an enormous country with, I don't know, what, 1/6 of the population of the States, maybe even smaller. And so it's very costly for musicians to tour across this country. So that was a really viable option. And so we had explored the possibility of me being the poster girl for the comeback after COVID and all that kind of thing. And with the opens and closures of COVID, it just all kept falling through on me. And even down to local level in venues, the poor things were like being told they could open, then next week they had to close.
Yeah.
So all the artists were getting caught in the middle of this. They were booking their shows, then they were getting their and full tours, nationwide tours, getting cancelled like at the last minute. And I just figured it was a losing game to put your money into any of that at that point. And I really didn't like having kind of being shoehorned into a position where me as a musician, it sat on my shoulders to say, you can come to my show, but you cannot, depending on what card you were holding during all of that business. And that just didn't really sit very well with me. To me, music should be a uniting force instead of a dividing one. So coming out of all of that stuff, it felt like the most attainable way would be to bring house concerts to people, because curbside concerts were a big thing during COVID, where musicians would rock up to your driveway and do an outdoor show for you and your neighbours and such. So I was just elaborating on that concept. So with all of these modes of transport falling through and a background of cycling, I just figured, sure, look, I'll just hit the road with my bicycle. I have a bike. And I hadn't really done any significant cycling since I got to Canada, actually, because it's quite intimidating over here, the size of everything and blah, blah, blah.
You didn't have a horse at this time either. So
I did not. I still do not have a horse at this time. However, funny side note, I stayed with a couple of horse owners and met a number of people riding their horses over this last 2 years of touring. And the seed has been sown for doing a cross Canada horseback version. So we'll see. It'll probably take me until I'm 60 to organize that. But anyway, but yeah, anyway, so that just made sense. So I spent the remainder of 2021, pretty much the whole year, just researching bikepacking, because until that point, I had only ever done supported tours with my dad and my brother across Ireland and Argentina, a lot of fundraising for the National Council for the Blind and things like that. So you would always travel with a convoy, loads of stewards that would close off the road because there would be 80 plus of you cycling, and, you know, a tech and med team traveling with you. So this was an entirely different realm for me.
How did you wrap your head around going solo? Because it was so different. You don't have a support team anymore. Like, okay, can I do this by myself? Do I have everything I need? Do I have the mental fortitude, the courage to do all these things?
You know, if I had thought about it too hard, it probably wouldn't have gone. So
fair.
I think I definitely have that kind of personality where I just jump in for the adventure and figure it out along the way. even though that goes against the fact that I just said I spent a year researching it. But what I researched really was other musicians that I had found who had done cycling tours, and I interviewed them to figure out what was the easiest way. There's also a phenomenal Facebook group called Bicycle Traveling Women. And
Interesting.
it's a private group, and you jump in there, and it's a place where you can ask all your embarrassing girl questions as well.
Sure.
If you're feeling intimidated about tech or gear or saddle fit or hygiene on the road, anything like that, or safety, it's a phenomenal resource of wisdom. And there's everybody in there. And what I loved about it so much is that there's people in there who have spent like 5 years cycling their bicycles around the world. And there's people in there who are 70, just retired, and they're about to embark on their first 3-day bike packing tour, and they're in there and they're like dropping comments in the thing, being like, girls, I'm so nervous, like I'm really excited, I'm gonna go do this weekend trip for myself, but my grown sons, the 3 of them, are just beside themselves, they're afraid I'm gonna die, they're telling me not to go. And then all these women pile into the comments being like, forget it, life begins at 70, go for it, it's the most freedom you'll ever have. It's brilliant, so good.
What an amazingly empowering venue to be able to draw experience and support from.
Yeah.
I know it even existed. We will for sure put that in our liner notes at the end of the show for people to reference, because I think that is an amazing resource. And that kind of dovetails into my next question. I've done a fair amount of solo bike touring myself, but as a man, I'm sure it's a much different experience for any number of reasons. What do you think were some of the differences traveling as a female?
I kept to Highway 3 for one thing.
Yeah.
If you go a little more north on the west of Canada, for women and especially Indigenous women, that's not a good area to be. So I was told in no uncertain terms by a lot of experienced cyclists and people who live in the west of Canada, I'm kind of on the border, just to stay south. And also, one of the musicians I spoke to, that was the route he had taken, for the simple fact that the Rocky Mountains are at their shallowest there. They're not as steep. So it's a much easier pass to go through there.
Sure.
So I kept to routes that I knew were safe. I listened to my gut so much. There was one pass in particular, it was called Green Mountain Road, leaving from the grist mill in Carameas going up to Penticton. And I don't know why I chose to take that route the first year out, but I did. And I just had like this sinking feeling in my gut. And I don't know, like if there's anyone in the room that's going to pick up on a ghost, it's probably me anyway. I've been like that since I was a little girl. So I don't think it was anything sinister. I feel like it was more just kind of like a being thing, like a spiritual thing. But I just had the heebie-jeebies about me the whole trip that time. So on the next year through, I went through BC again in 2023 before I went to Europe. So I actually reached out to a friend of mine here in Edmonton whose sister lived in the area, and I think she's a triathlete, like she's an intensely fit woman, and she teamed up with me. She met me at the grist mill after I'd played a show there again, and then we took like the actual highway, which was so much more beautiful. Like I was like, I'm really glad I discovered it. It was like spectacular lakes and things like that, and we had a gift of a day. So a couple of things I did to kind of mitigate risk, I suppose, for myself was reaching out to local cyclists to cycle with me for a portion.
Smart.
I didn't broadcast my actual location in real time on social media. I kept a good 2-week or more buffer between posts, which got tricky because I was a musician playing shows. So I also had to advertise ahead of schedule.
Right.
The timeline got a bit like kind of messy, but things like that. And then my family mainly were the main people I had to appease at home because they were like losing it with worry at this prospect of me leaving. So the Peacekeeper was a Garmin InReach satellite phone.
Uh-huh.
And so I loaded that up with all my close friends and family. So I set the membership setting to like 10-minute increment bleeps or whatever. And
Yeah.
so they were able to follow me all the way along. And every night, no matter what coverage my phone had, I was still able to, as long as I saw the sky, send out a message when I reached my checkpoints and stuff like that. So they were able to keep really close tabs on me. And then also I had my bear spray attached directly at my hip. I had what do you guys call it? I call it a bum bag, a fanny pack, right? Fanny pack. Fanny means something different in Ireland. It's just hilarious.
I am aware, yes.
So I had that around me, which would have like, my passport and my money and stuff in. And so clipped to that, I would have my bear spray and the satellite phone, and then the air horn, a giant can of that in my my handlebar feed bag. So there was lots of things like, and it was really like there was bears and stuff like that, but mainly I needed them for farm dogs. Farm dogs are nuts, like they're a whole other level. But anyway, I did have one or two gentlemen remark on my collection on my hip, and they're like, oh, is that for like 2 legs or 4 legs? I'm like, well, whatever needs it at the time. And they're like, oh, understood. Like it was all just very jesty, so
Brilliant.
and I had a really interesting conversation with an Indigenous woman in Hope, BC, and we had this phenomenal exchange, but it boiled down to her asking me, did I ever get scared as a woman traveling by myself?
Yeah.
And no, like she's done an enormous amount of traveling herself too, and she's higher risk because she's Indigenous, frankly, and it's lousy. But the two of us just agreed, you listen to your gut all the way along. And as long as you listen to that, it should keep you safe, like just as much as a dude.
Yeah. Intuition is powerful, for sure. I thoroughly believe that. And I read a quote somewhere. I don't know if it's anyone famous, but it said basically over prepare and then go with the flow.
100%. Yeah.
So
and
it
that
sounds like you took some good precautions, but then eventually I'm sure you kind of found your groove and just went with it.
That's it. And actually, I was finishing up a show. I forget the name of the town now, but anyway, somewhere in BC, and 3 very big, burly, very tall gentlemen were just finishing up in the cafe I was in, and one of them got the door for me. I was on my way out also. And he remarked again on the satellite phone on my hip. And he turned out to be a retired wildfire rescue gentleman. And he was only too relieved to see that I had that on me, because he was like, you wouldn't believe the amount of rescues we go out to do. And the only level of preparation anyone has is their phone. And that's plan A, B, C, and D for them. And so he was like, as a father myself, I see that on your hip. I can sleep easy tonight, and good girl, essentially. So that was great.
Well, it's probably comforting to know that it sounds like it's reassuring that you're doing things the right way. You're keeping yourself safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, you'll book a show in a town, I don't know, 80, 100 kilometers away, and you just know that you've got 3 days to get there, and you just kind of rock up with your bike and your gear and like, hey, I'm ready to go. Like, what are you carrying? How are you transporting all these things? I'm guessing, well, let me back up. What instrument are you carrying, and why are you playing?
The first year out, I did cross Canada, Victoria to Halifax. I was 5,500 kilometers, and I had a bob trailer attached to my bike, and that had the bob bag, which was full of my show clothes, my show shoes. I had a total of 4 pairs of shoes with me, like the
Only
worst.
4? Why so few?
Well, just because sometimes you want to pack light as a girl.
Right.
But, well, if you think about it, I had like cycling shoes, right?
Sure.
And they were like the kind of bike packery ones. So they look like runners, but they've got the cleats.
Yep.
And some days it's really rainy. So you got to get down to the camp toilets or whatever, and you don't want to be in soggy feet. So I had my runners with me. Then there's sunny days. So I had my flip flops with me.
Of course.
And then there's all the show days. So I had my glitter docs with me. So it adds up. So I had all the show clothes, some CDs, some cables, a microphone, and my laptop, and a very, very woolly Irish jumper that my dad gave me, wrapped around the laptop for safety, plus an extra woolen blanket too for the first half of the trip before I got to Edmonton the first year out, because it was like -10 before I left, so I needed the extra warmth. But anyway, it was quite heavy. And then on top of that was my little guitar, and I don't have it super handy here, but it's a Lava Me carbon fiber guitar, which was nice to have something carbon fiber, because the touring bike is like steel, right? It's like an composite. And so anyway, this guitar, for anyone that is unfamiliar with instruments, so typically a guitar is made of wood, and it's made of multiple different types of wood, especially on the neck. So you would have one type of wood on the back and another type of wood glued to the surface where all the strings are, where you play. And those two chunks of wood glued together are then attached to the body, which is hollow. So there's all these different densities of wood, all changing to the humidity and the temperature at different rates. So I just had, now plenty of musicians, like there's like Juno award-winning Jeremy Fisher, who has famously cycled across the country, a few other musicians who just took guitars with them, and they were mostly fine. But I was trying to do these performances at a professional level, so I just didn't want the extra stress of, a broken guitar halfway along. So the carbon fiber seemed to make most sense. And I also looked at doing collapsible guitars. There's lots of guitars that fold down on themselves and they go into a very small case. It looks like you're almost carrying like a shotgun. But those are completely reliant on being plugged into an amp. So I didn't know what environments I would be playing in. So the additional benefit of this Lava Me is that it's a one-piece molded piece of carbon fiber. So it's fully acoustic, but it also has a little microphone built into itself. So it comes with effects like reverb and delay, but it also self-amplifies. So if you're in an environment where there is no PA that you can't amplify yourself, I can just hit a little button and it gives an extra boost of volume to my guitar. So all around, it was a really good selection. Mm-hmm. So, and it's 3/4 size as well. So it's travel size. So it does actually fit nicely within the bob trailer. And then I actually live across the road from a guy who used to be a competitive cyclist and now he's a machinist. So he was able to modify the trailer itself and build an extra layer of bars to keep the guitar nice and safe. So then I just bungeed it down and everything was safe with a tarp.
Are you happy with the sound quality of this? Is it similar or as good as the guitar you would normally use if you weren't, say, bike traveling with it?
Yeah, I'm really happy with it. It comes with its own challenges once you plug it in. So I really like it as a purely acoustic guitar. But once it's plugged into a PA system, I ended up having to buy a few extra pedals so I could EQ it better. And then, it's a really good one. And it comes with Elixir strings that keep their sound a lot longer than, say, D'Addario's. And I lowered my action too, so it plays really nicely. As acoustic guitars go, it's small and concise and light and very fun to play.
So remind me again, how long were you touring?
The first year, 2022, was 5.5 months. I left on Earth Day, April 22nd. And then I got to Halifax on the 1st of October. That was my deadline because I had an album launch show booked back in Edmonton on the 31st of October and still had to rehearse a whole band. So that was 5.5 months. I did have a knee injury halfway through there. So the 7,000 kilometers turned into 5,500. Some of it was done in a car. And then the next year, I was probably out of Canada a good 9 months. And that was for a various amount of reasons. But mainly I was back in Ireland starting to write the next record, which is, in fact, I got a grant from Edmonton Arts Council to make my next record, which is called Time Under Tension, and it's inspired by all the stories I gathered from Canadians cycling across
I
the
love
country.
it.
So there's it's really fun. We're working on it right now, and there's lots of fun little like cyclist Easter eggs in the music. So there's like sounds of like freewheeling. A freewheeling bicycle, like the sound of the chain going around the cogs and stuff like that.
I
So,
love that
yeah,
metaphor. I've never heard Easter eggs. I think that's a great metaphor.
thanks.
Maybe this is a stretch, but since you spend so much time cycling and music is such a large part of your life, do you think there's any crossover or similarities between the two? Cycling, long distance, and music?
Yeah, endurance and perseverance. Oh my God. Anyone that works in the music industry will know it's a long game. It's a game of endurance, and you just have to keep hammering away. And I did a music entrepreneurial course in Toronto in 2019, and one of their most favorite sayings there at Canada's Music Incubator was, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And your goals can be enormous, and it
Yeah.
can be daunting when you look at the full picture. But when you break it down to bite-sized pieces, it makes it really achievable. And that's the same thing with cycling any distance. And especially once I hit my groove, the day really just fell nicely into little sections. So like a sweet day for me would be like an 80-kilometer. Now, like also bearing in mind the entire weight of this whole cycling rig, not counting my weight, was 192 pounds at its heaviest. So it really was like endurance. Hence I burnt out my knee because like technique
Oh,
and stuff like that. And another cycling tip, that's where like focusing on your cadence will really save your bones and your joints. Oh my God. Um, but yeah, my day really just broke down into like, well, the first 10K is simply my warm up of the day. And then if I can bust out 40 kilometers before noon, break for lunch in the hottest part of the day, and then get back on the bike, do another 40K, you're already at like, what's that, 80, 90K for the day. And you
it's a
haven't
solid
really
day.
thought about it, right? So,
Yeah.
so yeah. And then on the heavy days, you might be doing up to, I think my heaviest was like 125 or 130 or something. But that would be a fairly grueling day, But, if you can get like 4 or 5 or 6 days in a week doing 90K, like sure, you're going to definitely clear your way along a country pretty quick.
With 190 pounds of vehicle,
Yeah.
were you just eating like crazy? Because I mean, that is a ton of work.
It's a ton of work, yeah. For context, for anyone that's listening that doesn't know the geography of Canada, Edmonton is north and just inland, essentially, of the Rocky Mountains, which are on the west coast. So I started on the west coast, on the coastal side of that mountain range. So by the time I went inland, up and over those mountains, and got to my home, for a stop off, also I was injured on the first injury. I looked in the mirror and I swear it looked like I had been deadlifting for 6 months. Like my quads were like intense. I was like, wow, I've never seen myself look like this before. But then interestingly, once I adjusted my technique and focused on my cadence,
Sure.
all that muscle leaned right down and it wasn't so bulky anymore. Um, but yeah, sorry, I lost the run of myself. I forget your actual question.
Oh, I was just curious. Like you're just working so hard all
Oh,
day. Like were
eating.
you just eating everything? Because some people I've interviewed on the show before are the people who I've talked to who've done long trips. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we can't get enough calories, and they're riding bicycles that do not weigh 192 pounds.
Yeah, funny. I never felt like I couldn't get enough. Not at all.
Okay.
I focused on pretty fatty, pretty protein based stuff. Like my favorite snack would be like a cheesy bun with peanut M&Ms would be the business, Um, And after that cross Canada cycle, with the knee injury, I went to a nutritionist, and in fact, props to my family doctor as well. The first thing he went to was diet and exercise beyond medication, which I love. And the
Interesting.
first thing he said to me was like, "Okay, get on an anti-inflammatory diet to fix your knee so you can go back out again next year." And that's exactly what I did. So an anti-inflammatory diet obviously is cutting out sugars and
Yep.
wheats and things like that. And so for the couple of months before I left the second time round, I was essentially doing like a keto diet, like hardly any carbs or like wheaty, bready stuff. And I loved it. My body felt immense and smooth and pain free. And I tried to maintain that out on the bike. And I remember one day, I think I was in Hope, BC, and I had gotten in quite late, and I was hoping to catch the supermarket just before it closed, which I did. And I went in and I got like the last rotisserie chicken on the stand. And I went outside and it was dusk and I was like a disgusting, sweaty mess. And I just stood out there like with my bare hands, like eating this like chicken. I must have devoured like a good third of it. And it
Oh,
only
caveman.
lasted. Yeah, proper. And I was taking a few days off in that town anyway, but like the chicken didn't last long at all, at all. And so I tried to keep up that type of diet. But I don't think I had given my body long enough to acclimatize to that style of eating with that amount of workload on it. So I just remember the feeling of giving in and eating I think it was like a croissant or something the next day. And it was just like a light going off in my brain. It was like ping, like immediately better attitude,
Yeah.
better feeling, way more like mental focus. I didn't realize how like dozy and foggy I was getting out on the bike, which was getting dangerous. So I would be really keen to explore that again, but I really learned that you need so much longer lead time for your body to acclimatize to start burning fat as calories before sugars. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Nutrition is so key in any kind of
Mhm.
endeavor like this,
Yeah.
as is rest, sleep, recuperation. So, where are you sleeping most of the time? Any warm shower stories?
Oh my gosh, warm showers. I can't say enough good things about it, really. I must have stayed with warm shower hosts across Canada and Europe 40% of the total time,
Amazing.
possibly even higher in Europe, in fact, because it's so difficult to wild camp in Europe.
Right.
And I tried a couple of the other websites, Welcome to My Back Garden and stuff like
I've
that,
seen
where
that.
they're similar models, but
Yeah.
it's more of a tending situation. And I got zero replies on that. It felt like no one was terribly active on that. But warm showers is just the best. Like there's so many people to choose from in almost every place you're going to. Warm showers actually helped me route all of my schedule really
Ah,
because I would reach out in advance and figure out an appropriate distance for me to cycle and then make sure I had locked down places to stay. And any times that I couldn't find a warm shower host, then I would camp or I would rely on networks of my own of people that I knew around the place. But yeah, warm showers was foundational to being able to do this tour. I can't thank it enough, honestly, for existing. It's so cool.
I love hearing that. Well, I have really enjoyed talking to you, and I have so many more questions, but that'll have to be for another time. And so, for people who have been listening to our story, enjoying our conversation, how can they find out what you're up to, where you're traveling with a 2 week lag time, of course? Anything, any information about your new album, where should they look for you?
Well, I should be getting the physical 12-inch vinyl of the new album, Pendulum
Vinyl.
State. Vinyl. It's gold vinyl. I
Yeah.
You can pre-order it on the front page of my website. It's 0Stella.com. 0Stella.com is how you spell it.
Easy.
And you actually caught me on the first day of like gym training because I'm doing another cycling album tour through Ontario this September. So again, I'm relying on house concert hosts and warm shower hosts to host me through all of that. There's going to be concerts in Owen Sound in Toronto, in Napanee, Ontario, Waterloo, a bunch of places. They're all posted on my website. And I'm always playing house concerts too. And when I do house concerts, they're like 2 hours long with a 15-minute intermission and always full of music and of stories from cycling across all of the different countries that I've been through. So yeah, if you're interested in following along the tour in Ontario, getting your hands on that beautiful gold vinyl, or hosting me for a house concert, you can reach me at 0Stella.com or at 0Stella Music on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and I have a YouTube channel as well, 0Stella.
All those socials. I love it. Well, just know that there is a fantastic music scene in Colorado. So if you ever make your way across the border, come this direction, because we've got good music and we always need more.
I have heard. You're definitely on my radar. I would love to. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. Well, everyone, thanks for listening to my conversation with Liz Pomeroy, 0Stella. If you enjoyed our show, give us a like, a share on your social channels, or just tell your friends. These stories hopefully will inspire you to set off on your own bicycle adventure and maybe make the world feel a little bit smaller, one pedal stroke at a time. My name is Jerry Kopak, and until next time, keep riding.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the show as much as we enjoyed making it. Wherever you are listening, please leave us a rating and a review, as it helps us reach more cyclists and hosts around the world. Visit us at Warmshowers.org to become a part of our community, or on Instagram at Warmshowers_org. If you would like to be a guest on the show or submit a question, please make sure to email us at podcast@warmshowers.org.